All right, we call this meeting to order. I need to do a roll call. So Mike Borchers,
Here.
Preston Graham,
Here.
Justin Pate,
Here.
Julie Pyle,
Here.
Lee Todd. I think he went to the other one. Be right back.
He's coming.
Okay, Lou Young here, and Aaron Thompson. All right, so we're excited this afternoon to hear from our Chief Performance Officer, Karen Dodd, and our KBE Strategic Data Analysis, Leslie McKinney, to present an update. So welcome.
Thank you. We're happy to be here. Leslie's joining me today. Leslie's part of my team. She's one of my two research data analysts. She's going to be sharing with you the feedback that we received on the prototype 4. You'll be seeing the framework version 1 from Jennifer, I believe, later this afternoon, maybe tomorrow. Today. So this is just kind of a preview of what the feedback was that got us to that framework. Okay. So on the first slide, you'll see that, and you guys have seen this a million times, we have about 45 members right now. We still meet on average twice a year. We actually did meet 3 times this year, 2 in person and 1 virtual, and that was to discuss the feedback for for the prototype 4.0. I'm getting so confused with all the prototypes and now we're on the framework. So we went through that with them. Penny Christian is still the chair of our council. Jim Flynn is the vice chair. And then myself as the council lead. Going on to the next slide. This is our journey to the moon, or our roadmap, if you will. And I went ahead and put a little star on there so that you can see where we are right now. So we've already been through the whole prototype development. We've been in the study phase. I would say we're still in the study phase. So even though you see the star a little farther ahead, we continue to seek feedback every step of the way through the prototypes and even with the current framework that you'll be hearing about. But we are at the point where we're getting close to an actual recommendation. That what you're going to hear later today is not quite a recommendation yet, but this is where we're about into this phase. You can go to the next one. So the October convening is what I'm going to spend a little bit of time on here. We shared the prototype survey feedback with the full council members, and that's what we're going to share with you, what Leslie's going to share with you today. So we went through each of the areas of the prototype with them. And then Sarah Snipes and her team, she has innovation specialists that are specific to different regions across Kentucky. They did some focus groups with both the 18 local laboratories of learning, so our 18 L3s, and we also picked out 18 non-L3 districts, looking across Kentucky, looking at high performing, low performing, middle of the road performing, making sure that we had a real good mix, so geographically as well as all those other demographics and things like that. So her team went out and did focus groups in all of those areas. And I've got some of that data that I'll share with you, the key findings that came out of that as well. Then we had some small groups discussion in the October board meeting, really getting down to what they liked about the prototype, what they didn't like about the prototype. And then we left it with KBE and our partners would put together a new framework and bring that back to them. So that's what's been happening since the October board meeting. Next slide. So now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Leslie, and she's going to share that survey data that we received back from that prototype 4.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Sure.
I do want to spend just a little bit of time on the next slide talking about the context and the makeup behind the survey itself. The survey was launched in September. It was out for about a month, and it did go through lots of different vehicles to get out there. It was in the media, it was in social media sites, it was on our webpage, it was sent out with various role groups. And so there was a strong attempt to get lots of feedback from various stakeholders across the state of Kentucky. I also want to kind of let you know that this was not the only method of getting feedback on this prototype. This survey was simply just one of the ways that they got feedback. So all in all, there were 647 folks who responded to this survey, and they didn't necessarily answer every single question that they were asked. The survey was built around 4 specific domains, that being state accountability, federal accountability, assessment systems, and how we report those to the public. And so I'm going to kind of go through each one of those domains and how it's sort of folded out with the feedback as it pertains in those particular areas. I do want to point out that if you look at the numbers, we did want to give you the end count of by role group of who answered the survey. And obviously these numbers are underrepresented for a large number of these groups. And so again, just a reminder that these weren't the only way that feedback was solicited from the folks in these groups. We did have an other category where folks were able to sort of put in the group that they most associated with if they didn't find themselves within one of the categories that we gave them. And you'll see sort of a description of that along the bottom. That number was quite small. And so what we'd like to do now is just sort of jump right into that first domain, if we could. Next slide, please. So the first question that we really wanted to look at pertained to the state accountability model, and it presumes that there would be a vibrant learning indicator as a part of this model. And in that, what this first question, the first graph on the left, and that first question is really seeking to find out is if there's a vibrant learning indicator, would that measure need to be one that measured the access students, how much access students had to a vibrant learning experience, or the quality of those vibrant learning experiences. And you can see that 61% of the respondents did feel like access was the direction that they wanted to take, a measure of vibrant learning. When we move to the, I'm sorry.
Can we
Yes.
Can we ask questions during the presentation?
Absolutely.
Or do we wait?
Yes.
Okay. I love that question. I love that you premised it with it. It was presuming vibrant learning based on the feedback and the whole process, what Kentucky United We Learn has been about, how the council has responded. I sure wish I could have said both as an answer to that question. So I think we just need to think about that it doesn't necessarily mean that quality of vibrant learning isn't also considered to be an important element of the process moving forward.
And also too, you could consider this as kind of a phased in approach.
Exactly.
Start with
From
access
to
to
quality.
quality.
That's an even better point. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And sort of following along those lines, there was also the question of whether or not it should move more towards an accreditation type model, meaning that schools and districts were able to provide evidence and support for why they rated themselves a certain way and for how others might rate them on particular indicators. And so 63% of the respondents did feel like moving towards an accreditation style model would be a good direction to go. And then with that, they kind of had a follow-up question of if it is an accreditation type model, should we have an external sort of evaluator looking at that evidence in order to make that rating a little less biased maybe? And so 55%. So we're really kind of split on that last question. About half felt one way or the other about whether or not an external audit or evaluator would be used. Next slide, please. Going back to the vibrant learning experiences, in the survey, we did propose some vibrant learning opportunities that have come to the forefront in several of the meetings and groups throughout this work with United We Learn. And we were looking to see what percentage of stakeholders agreed with those being a part of the quality, if you will, or the types of vibrant learning experiences going on across Kentucky. And in every one of those instances, you can see there's fairly high agreement, all the way up from 2/3 and up from the student-led conferences all the way up to the highest one, which was personalized learning paths for students, and even in the other options of having districts have the ability to have some locally offered ways of looking at vibrant learning experiences. So all in all, it was a successful, well-received, it seems to be portion of the overall accountability model. Next slide, please. So the next thing we wanted to look at was how we felt about the the way that things are reported, specifically the color-coded rating system. For districts, you can see that more than three quarters of respondents felt like that we need to do away with the color-coded ratings, and that probably is not a surprise to you all if you've seen this before. And additionally, about three quarters also believe that we should expand what that accountability system should look like beyond just those types of ratings to include things beyond achievement, things that included community involvement, parent engagement, vibrant, again, learning experiences and other factors. And so really just broadening the scope of what we had in our accountability model. So there was large agreement for both of these. Next slide, please. We did have a couple of open-ended questions where folks were able to sort of share how they felt about what would it take and what needs would they have related to different things along the way. And this one is specific to the resources and supports they felt they would need in order to make vibrant learning experiences happen. Funding came up over and over again. I will also tell you on the open-ended responses, oftentimes you get feedback that wasn't specific to that question, but was important feedback overall. And so although it may not have answered this question, if we felt like the feedback we got from respondents on this question fell into another category or needed to be heard by the folks making these decisions, we did include that. These are the larger themes that sort of popped up. They're not the only things that came up. We did share a very specific, every single one of these different types of feedback with the groups when we met with them back in October. But funding obviously rose to the top. A lot of people felt like it was going to take a lot more funding in order to give our students more vibrant learning experiences. And that ranged anywhere from we need additional staff, which also is parsed out here a little bit further down, but folks saying we need more staff to develop those. We need more staff to monitor those. We may need funding for field trips, for curricular and other resources. And so it really did, the funding kind of went across all sorts of domains there. Professional development, how not only to write those, but how to actually provide students in the pedagogy around providing vibrant learning experiences for their students, more curricular support. And then really what came to the top in several of these areas was this community and stakeholder buy-in, that in order to truly give our students these types of experiences, we needed our local communities to really understand the importance of what it is we're trying to do and meet the needs of the larger community moving out. And so really just a greater and stronger partnership. And it did seem to be more of a partnership versus just resources, even though it fell to this question, but we felt it was important because it came up so much to share that with you. You'll also see just a quote that came directly from one of these respondents. And again, a lot of the responses were that long. And so we would take different parts out and try to find the overall themes of what it was folks were looking to accomplish with this question. It is also important to note that there were some concerns, not only in this open-ended response, but in the ones that you'll see toward the end. And we do think that's important. You'll see it in the form of equity, a lot of concern about rural and smaller districts being able to have the same access and opportunities with whether or not they can hire curriculum people to help with some of this work in the case of vibrant learning experiences, or even just the funds to do some of these things. And so we did feel like it was important to let you know that that did come up quite a bit throughout the survey in terms of open-ended responses.
Chair Bloodworth, I just would make a comment there. I've thought about that a lot since I saw these data back in October at the Cool Council meeting, and I'm not disagreeing with the survey. That's futile, silly. But I'm really struggling with this idea that smaller, more rural districts would have trouble providing vibrant learning experiences, because I so often, as I travel the state, see the smaller schools actually like crushing vibrant learning because they're often more nimble. They have the kind of alacrity to be able to do that kind of learning. So I think that's one that, as we move forward, and certainly as a leadership team at the department, really think about how we can get at what that concern really is. Perhaps it is, if you're I was in a Eastern Kentucky community where the superintendent told me that the only businesses in the community were the nursing home and the Family Dollar. So if it's a matter of having places where students can actually go for work-based experiences, I think that is certainly a valid point and a consideration. But what I like so much about the way we've talked about vibrant learning is that it's what works in your context, in your community. What will your community support? What does that look like? And to your earlier point, Commissioner, helping folks move more and more toward increased access and quality of vibrant learning over time. This is not one of those things that we're going to say, fall of 25 vibrant. You know, we're not pushing a button. So
I
And if
think
I
there's
may-
probably still a lot to learn about what a vibrant learning experience is, right? Because it was the School
Sure.
Council that came up with this term and defined it. So there may not be probably not
A
a
lot
good
of
understanding
common
yet of
agreement.
what it
Sure,
is.
sure.
So knowing what they would need to do.
sure.
I think also too, an important aspect as of right now of the model framework is having districts of like resources work together on developing local accountability. Again, not saying that all these districts have to have the same local accountability. It's just how do you work together to make sure you're providing opportunities? And it amazes me how much our community technical systems, also our surrounding districts are working together, even that they're crossing county boundaries, which is something that is relatively new for Kentucky, for us to cross those county boundaries to help each other out with these type of things. We'd always cross to compete in sports and things of that nature, but to cross those boundary lines to say, what can we do to make sure that all students are getting vibrant learning? And then two, that's one of the important parts of that survey is we say another locally defined vibrant learning opportunity, because I've heard some people talk about vibrant learning, and this is questionable, but talking about local vibrant learning could be access to AP credit type classes. Okay, is that something that you could use? I don't know, but that's some things that we've left some doors open there, so there can be some local definitions. The point there to me when we talk about vibrant learning is relevance for the kid, for the student.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, one of the things that we also had to pay close attention to was the federal accountability requirements. And so essentially there were two questions that sort of fell into that category. And the first being, should we report only what is required by in terms of federal federal school classification systems? And there was high agreement for the minimum required there for federal reporting. When you move over to the right, you can see that question was specific about, do we continue to include the quality of school climate and safety survey results as a part of our accountability model as a sort of an other indicator? And again, there was almost 2/3 of the folks, or halfway between 2/3 and a half, felt that it was strongly desired to keep some form of quality in school climate safety survey results within the accountability model. And remember, that is the one that is given to students at the beginning of the spring assessment. And so it's given one time a year in the spring to those students who are assessed with our KSA system.
So Leslie, could you say a little bit more about those three on the left? The question was yes or no, but then it's targeted support.
I think there was some confusion in how, if I'm being quite frank, in how this question was asked. I think
Okay.
I don't know that people understood that they were necessarily agreeing to each one of these as a separate thing, even though our numbers look like they
Okay.
did. I think the question really probably should have been framed holistically. Do we
Okay.
meet the federal requirements for
Okay.
classification systems? So this is one of those questions, I'm glad you asked, that I think there was a bit of confusion in how
Okay.
folks answered.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So social studies and writing came up, and we, in terms of how this was deployed in the survey, grouped those together in one question, which was, how do we deal with social studies and writing moving forward in our accountability model? I will also sort of preface this by saying, I think if you would have separated these, you probably would have seen a bit of different results between social studies and writing, but because people had to sort of address it collectively, it does appear a little different. And the reason that I say that is, in reading a lot of the open-ended responses, this came out. I would have felt this way about social studies, but not writing, or vice versa. And even science came up with social studies and writing questions. But just to look at the questions and the way that they were framed, you can see 57% felt like we should remove social studies and writing from the accountability model. And then if you move down and you start to look at, if we do that, do we want to then validate or assess our students with social studies and writing using a performance-based type of assessment? There was about the same amount of agreement for that as there was in that would require then the state essentially helping to build some capacity on how to write those and how to administer those in districts. And so those ones, the bottom left and the top right, really, again, it's another two questions that I think folks really didn't make a distinction between. Yes, we're good with performance-based, but yes, we will need support with that. And then finally is, if it is removed from from the state accountability system, should it then be in some way reported or looked at in terms of a local accountability model? And you can see there is, again, right at 57%. Again, catty corner from the other question, felt like it should be in there somewhere. But where that sort of landed was something that I think there's a lot of room for continued discussion around, given these results. Next slide, please. When we were looking at mathematics and reading, we got a much clearer picture. And so one of the questions is should we move reading and math to what they call a through-year model? Meaning, instead of just assessing students in the spring each year, should we be assessing students throughout the year, in the fall, the winter, in the spring, perhaps just as districts normally do with local or interim benchmark assessments throughout the year? And there was strong agreement at 75%. 3/4 of the respondents felt like, yes, we should move through to a through-year model for assessing reading and math. And then the next question was, if we do that, essentially, are you willing to replace your local assessments, the ones that you already have in place in your local schools and districts, with this type, if it's in the model? And again, we had over 2/3 agree that yes, they would be willing to do that or in favor of that.
Did you guys look at the breakdown between the yeses and nos to see if it's the educators or what? Or administrator who was?
We did.
The nos.
We did.
Next.
Absolutely. And I would not be truthful if I could tell you on this particular question which felt the way they did, but we do have a slide for you and something we can present for you that breaks every question down by every role group. So that is one of the things that we looked at were sort of patterns by certain role groups, like how did superintendents tend to feel across the way? How did teachers tend to feel? And on particular questions, did certain things sort of rise to the top? And so we did do an analysis that way, so that the groups that were kind of moving towards, again, those frameworks would have that additional information. I don't think we included it in this presentation, but we are happy to
I can get that to you if
get
you'd
that
like.
to you here shortly.
I'm curious on this question because it affects the classroom. So I was curious.
I will tell you in terms of I can tell you in terms of reading the many, many open-ended responses, and there were over 1,000 of those, lots of teacher support, clearly teacher support for a through model system, and to not over-assess. If we're already assessing them 3 times a year anyway. And also, on a side note, there was a good deal of support through the open-ended responses for the fact that this could replace the burdensome costs maybe of districts who are using certain local interim assessments throughout the year. Even though I don't know if that's been determined, I think there was some understanding that maybe that would happen and it would free up some funds for districts.
When we talk about like replacing these local interim ones, I mean, are we talking like with something like it that gives teachers real data to change, to adjust instruction, not just like a summative kind of assessment, but
yeah, I think absolutely it would be going in that direction. And the follow-up slides will really talk about what they want to see in those.
Okay.
But yeah, the presumption is it's going to give them real-time data, on-time data that they can immediately make instructional decisions based on for their tiered supports that they're giving students, and also for their instructional pacing and gaps in students learning that
similar to
yes,
what they're using.
yeah, like you might be familiar with MAP or those types of programs that folks are using. So we'll move on to the next slide, and I think it may answer some more of your questions about math and reading. So when we dig more into, if we were going towards a year-round model, the next question was, if we do that, should it focus on sort of a scope and sequence and a pacing that's the same across the state for everyone as they move through fall, winter, and spring? Or should it be more of an adaptive assessment that sort of changes and moves wherever the student is? And so a lot of the local assessments that folks are using are adaptive in that nature. So the kid starts where they are and they can go as high as their ability and their skill level allows them to go. And so there was slightly more people were in favor of the adapted versus following the scope and sequence. There were some concerns raised about a scope and sequence, and assessment means there would have to be almost a statewide mandate of scope and sequence in instruction. And so that really wasn't what this question was asking, but that is what was implied by that. So there were some comments that was sort of a little cautious, I think, about that one in particular. The next question really talks about, if we are going to have a through model system, which one would count for accountability? And so there was strong agreement at 70% that it would be the spring assessment of that through-year model that would be the one that counted for accountability. And so it would account for instructional ebbs and flows throughout the year as students are learning that. But by the time they exited at the grade level they'd be assessed at, that's the one that would count for accountability.
So I'm assuming like in that scenario, the spring administration would have like the accommodations for IEP, like a reader, that kind of thing. Whereas the other ones wouldn't necessarily, because you want to see what they can actually do on their own. So you can, you know, create your instruction. I mean, depending on what the IEP is about, but like
We-
some of them.
I think
We have a lot of districts that do with their MAP or iReady or whichever assessment that they use. Since it's not for a grade, they'll give those assessments without accommodations unless there's absolutely necessary. You can see actually where the kid is and what kind of growth that you have.
And I think that helps. So I'm assuming you could still do that in the other two and then
Yeah.
just have their IEP accommodations for the last one.
I think it's the same.
Has there been any discussion with these through tests that would give us some kind of national ranking or national percentile?
Well, one of the things, Mike, that I've asked for as we move forward is looking at grade level equivalents. Maybe
Yeah.
not necessarily, we haven't really talked about national rankings. We haven't talked about that much at all. I haven't been in any conversations, but in order to say, okay, we talk about proficiency a lot. What exactly is proficiency as it relates to grade level equivalency? Is our mark for proficiency very, very high? Is it 1 or 2 grade levels above? Something of that nature. But that's an intricate question. It's a lot easier said than done. But again, one of the challenges moving forward, I believe, is making sure that we include grade level equivalency, because you can tell a parent your child is proficient.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of questions about what does that mean. But on the other hand, if you tell them that their child is a third grade, they know their child's a third grader and they're on the 4th grade reading level, then they're like, okay, they're above, but is that still proficient? By
Right.
what?
I guess all the years of MAP, one of the things we always shot and set goals for kids was to be at the 60th percentile.
Yeah.
Which was very easy to tell parents. If you're over the 50th percentile, you're competing with the average in the nation. I just think all the tests we've done with the norms always norm ourselves. And I would love to see something where we could tell parents or we could tell legislators, look, overall, we have so many percentage of our students at this percentile or at grade level, because like you're saying, what is proficient sometimes is this anemia, it's out there. I think if we could find something that would be a big help down the road as well.
Mike, remember that the federal requirement does include comparability for reading and math, grades 3 through 8 and once at high school. So there will be something, we can't talk about vendors or how the contract will unfold, but as they write the blueprint that goes out with proposals, they'll have to consider all those requirements at the federal level too.
But I
Okay,
think,
great.
we were hitting on something important too in communicating, not just with students, parents, teachers, but legislatures, business and industry partners. Proficient doesn't talk about a skill necessarily. It's something that we have normed in education circles, but to the rest of the world, it really has no value. So in thinking about how is it that we get a little more specific in demonstrating what that student is leaving knowing is going to be important on the business and industry side, so that they can understand what that student is capable of because of that rating.
I love that. And that's where Portrait of a Learner becomes so important, really being able to define and measure student outcomes around those competencies, which will ultimately be a big part of the vibrant learning experience too. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. Business and industry folks want to know what competencies kids are leaving high school with or post-secondary, and how can they translate that, parlay that into the workplace.
And honestly, those are the stakeholders we're having the hardest time getting feedback from.
Always.
Yep.
Yeah.
We only hear them what we're doing wrong in college world.
Busy people.
Okay, next slide, please. Again, we had more open-ended questions to gain feedback in terms of the supports and resources that might be needed in order to make some of these things happen. When it talks specifically about a local assessment accountability model and what would be needed in order to make that happen, what rose to the top again was funding. We also see training and PD kind of lumping in with that. Some of that also is tied to funding, so we did have to try to separate when we could the difference between those. They often can go together. assessment clarity and structure, was quite a bit of feedback from people about what they wanted to make sure whoever designed these kinds of systems or these frameworks understood that different districts and schools of different sizes had different complexities. And so, for example, it could be longer testing windows. So if they had fewer staff that could provide maybe accommodations as you were talking about or other things, or maybe their technology wasn't as strong and we rely greatly on technology with our assessment system right now, so that there'd be some flexibility in the structure of the assessment moving forward, and that would be equitable to districts of all sizes and with different sort of capacities. That also kind of went right into that equity and assessment design. Again, that was really largely about this smaller district and a concern that they would be at somewhat of a disadvantage on a local level if that became a part of the system, particularly if it was awarded points in terms of a larger accountability model and how they would fare there. And then to ensure that if we are going to move towards, especially those through-year models, that there was a scope and sequence and instructional resources so that everybody was on the same playing field, that everybody was very clear on what was being assessed and when, and that everybody sort of had equal access to that. When we talk about the through-year model and specifically what they wanted to get out of that, it was, and you all said it earlier, is they wanted that timely feedback. They wanted it while it was still time to do something with those students. We wanted a growth measure. That was something that came up a lot in all of the questions, even though it was really not targeted to ask that. Really, there was a cry for some sort of growth model of not only just students, like how students were growing over the course of the year, but how schools have grown within certain content areas. So how are we doing in terms of getting better in terms of reading over the course of time? And so growth at the school level and the student level by content area came up several times. Again, making sure that we had equitable and transparent pacing guides and documents and rubrics, and the standards were very clear for everyone. And then they wanted some sort of assessment as the through-year piece, especially that fall and winter, that had some diagnostic ability so that they could start to identify really specific skill deficits that students had or strengths that students had if they wanted to move towards enrichment and in preparing those students for those vibrant learning experiences. And so again, some of the things that ran through funding came up obviously quite a bit. And what would that look like? And a lot of it was just questioning, what would that look like? Would districts be responsible for that, or would the state be providing that? And so a lot of the questions weren't necessarily an outcry asking for more money as much as not really sure how that would work. Understanding that it might take more, where is that going to come from? All right, next slide, please. And then looking at how we report things, whether or not schools and districts and other stakeholders would be in favor of having a local component to accountability. Strong agreement for that. 85% felt like there should be a local component somehow in our new accountability model. Some themes that came out sort of around that, and I'm going to skip over to the right before I do the chart on the left if I can, or what would they like to see in an accountability model even beyond local. Part of that was new reporting and metrics transparency that was very clear what was being measured and when. Lots of descriptions, almost technical guidance type of things. Again, looking at growth beyond just student achievement and more in depth, more trend data as it pertains to growth over time on our report cards. A more holistic snapshot really talked about looking at more than just academics, but looking, and you'll see it a little bit further down, looking at everything that sort of goes on within that school community. And that kind of moves down even into the inclusion of contextual and equity factors, the floods that have happened, natural disasters that have happened in our state. Those are things that people felt strongly should be reported on the school report card, that people understood there was context sometimes behind the changes. COVID obviously would have been one of those. And so just the opportunity for districts to be able, and schools to be able to sort of highlight some of the things going on in their local area that they believe contributed to their overall performance, and really just calling out those community partners in a real positive way. Here are some partnerships we have with the community and how they've supported us, and having that not just on their webpage, but as a part of local reporting in general when the school report card came out. When you move back over to the left, one of the questions talked about, should we replace the language like novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished? And there was a lot of suggestions about how you could change those names, and often they were very similar: meets expectations, below expectations, on grade level, not on grade level, advanced. But slightly more people felt like we should keep it the same. If we're changing everything else, that the community and parents and students were familiar with novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished, and why change one more thing if it's just going to mean the same thing just for the sake of changing the name. And so a few, slightly more folks felt strongly to keep it the same, but others did provide lots of suggestions, which we have again passed on to these groups to consider for how those names might change. And again, came up again that cry or that call for growth.
All right, moving on. I'm going to go through these next slides pretty quickly. This is the work that our innovation specialist did out of the Division of Innovation. So this is under Sarah Snipes, also in coordination with UK Next Gen. Karen Perry was a big part of this work as well. These are, on the next slide, we have the 36 districts who participated in these focus groups, and those with the asterisk are the L3s. Those without an asterisk are the ones that were identified to supplement these focus groups. On the next page, you'll see the different stakeholder groups that were being targeted. So superintendents, DACs, chief academic officers, principals, assistant principals, teachers, instructional leaders, parents, community members, and students, all taking part in these focus groups. When it comes to themes on the next page, I don't think you'll see anything very surprising in here that we didn't already hear about in what Leslie just shared with us. So when it came to state accountability, VLE, there was a little bit of concern about that being objective. So vibrant learning experience, is that going to be, how will you actually measure that? It seems to be something that might be too subjective. Disparity between districts. So again, it might be that funding issue that they were concerned about, and then just calibrating expectations across all of the different districts. How is that going to be compared? When it comes to federal accountability, just like Leslie was just talking about with the color rating system, let's see, most of them wanting to move from the color rating system in this one. So heard a little bit different from Leslie. This one, they mostly wanted to move away from that color system, but keep the CSI and TSI. And again, they supported the growth model in these focus groups. When it comes to the assessment, we're looking at the through-year assessments. I think the overall theme was support around it, but the need for streamlining, avoiding redundancy, things like that. And then aligning those assessments with the vibrant learning experiences, I think was the other big one. For the local accountability here, we see that what they liked about it, or we're hoping that it would reflect the community values. Consistency across all districts. Again, we're seeing that a lot in here. And then there was that risk of losing standardization and that the need for equity. So that was kind of what came out when we start talking about local accountability with them. Okay, so next steps, we do have advisory groups coming up in December. I'm actually meeting with all of these different advisory groups. I already met with family. Sarah is meeting with the local school board members tonight. And then we have CTE coming up, teachers, student advisory, school counselors, and principals. So I'm meeting with all of them just to kind of get their thoughts on where we are with all of this work right now. In January, we will have our town hall meeting. So in every one of our regions, we are looking to the co-ops to help us set up town halls where, again, we'll invite all of those same stakeholders that we've been talking about into these conversations. Also looking to invite one of our L3s to each one of them so that they can look at, and we actually just had a really good brainstorming session with Karen Perry and Paul Leather, and then some of our internal folks on, I can't wait to share with you, Dr. Fletcher, what we just talked about, because we have a really great idea for how we want to set up these town hall meetings, the cadence of it and everything. So working through all of that still. And then we will meet again with the Cool Council. We're going to have actually 2 virtual meetings with them on February 3rd to go through all of the feedback that we've been hearing since what they have seen last. And then we'll come back to the board in February to hopefully share the next version, hopefully final version, maybe, of the framework.
To add to the next steps, we have, I'll be speaking at the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents Summit on Sunday. So I'm going to present there also to get more input. I'm actually going to be speaking to the Kentucky School Board Advisory Council. I'll do that on Thursday night at 6 o'clock, but also the town halls we're meeting with the co-ops, again, with superintendents and smaller groups. Then for the most part that evening is a town hall with also people there. So there's a lot of steps going through, and what we have 1.0, which you'll see today, but still, yet please know that we're looking at, after we get this December slot together, what is going to be our 2.0 to take into those town halls. So that, one of the things that you'll see, there's already been some great suggestions on what we could do to change and some other items like that. And I think we're narrowing down more and more to where we need to be. We still got some work to do, but there's some really good suggestions on how we move forward. And then that 2.0 will be the items that we take out to the co-ops. To the co-ops and to the town halls. And to gather input. There's a lot of questions in there that we still need to hear people talk about. So again, we're narrowing down, but there's still a lot of decisions to be made.
All I have, unless y'all have some questions.
Questions? Well, we really appreciate the update.
Our pleasure.
The ball is really moving along.
It is.
This is happening, people.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I guess if there are no other questions or comments, I need a motion to adjourn this committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Well, thank you. We'll reconvene in a few minutes with
2:00.
the big group.